There is an absolutely terrifying prospect ahead of us, which is that if Donald Trump were to be elected in the upcoming election, he would have an impact on the Supreme Court that would make it so long until we could get the Supreme Court back to any place of reason, even just sort of balance. It would be super conservative. Some might describe it as MAGA majority for decades and decades to come. And that's yet another reason that it's so important to vote. We talk about it, but I think sometimes it can get almost overwhelming how many things we've talked about, and a bunch of people, as we've been going through, don't even quite grasp the most basic elements of how this election is existential. But for those of you who do, add to the list. The Supreme Court could have this sort of impact on it by Donald Trump. We saw what he did last time, and something, adding to that, making it even worse could happen. And that would not just prevent progress, but bring us backwards, like what we saw with the overturning of Roe v. Wade for decades and decades. And so add that to the list. And as we're talking about this horrifying prospect, another reason to go out and vote, I do want to remind you of one of the justices, not that Donald Trump got into the court, but who has very much aligned himself with that ideology, especially as shown by the upside down flag story. This is, of course, Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito. And there's updates to this story if you heard it already, but just to backtrack, the bombshell that broke was that after January 6th, for sure, going into Biden's inauguration day, Samuel Alito's house was flying an upside down flag, which was a sign by MAGA of stop the steal, right? So playing into those conspiracy theories that the election was being stolen. Samuel Alito then came out and said, oh, my wife flew that. It's because she was being harassed by a neighbor. Well, now we have an update because of the neighbor telling a story. Here's from Rolling Stone. 3 days later, following the inauguration of President Joe Biden, the couple drove past the Alito household. Per the couple messages they sent to friends at the time, Martha Ann, wife of Samuel Alito, ran toward their car, yelled something. So you have a liberal neighbor, just to paint the picture in your head, and then the wife of Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito in this clash over political views. And that was supposed to be the justification for flying a Stop the Steal flag. Don't exactly get it. So Martha Ann ran toward their car, yelled something unintelligible, and as they drove past the Alito's residence, again, to exit the cul-de-sac, she appeared to spit at their car. Gonna really quickly pause your viewing of this video to ask you to subscribe to this YouTube channel if you want to help us continue to grow by clicking that subscribe button. And if you want the daily bonus show, you want to go a step further, click the join button below as well. When speaking to a Washington Post reporter per a story published last week, that same day, Martha Ann shouted that the flag was an international signal of distress. Then on February 15th, 2021, as the couple was pulling trash bins, the Alitos walked by Martha Ann, excuse me, used, and that was from the really messed things up in there, an explicitive, and called them fascists, while Justice Alito remained quiet, according to the Bidens and texts they sent at the time. In response, Emily said she used a lewd expression, said something to the likes of, how dare you behave this way? You've been harassing us over signs. You represent the highest court in the land. Shame on you. The report contradicts Justice Alito's claim that his wife hung the flag after insults were flung. The Bidens called the police following the incident regarding the conversation, and that has been confirmed by the New York Times. And so it doesn't seem to have gone the way that Samuel Alito said that it did. And it did seem to be a clash over political views. And whether it was to make the neighbors mad or not, she was doing the upside down, stop the steal sign, and Alito has yet to contradict that. And his only argument is, that's my wife's fault, which is a little bit strange given that it's your house too, sir. And I have to tell you, if I walked into my home or out of my home and there was a flagpole with the upside down flag indicating it was being shown by someone, I guess my wife, that this house stands for election lies and I'm a Supreme Court justice, that thing's getting flipped around to the correct way. You get my point. And that's not what he did. And so the blame your wife approach seems to just make this story worse. Then Democratic senators reached out to Samuel Alito and said, you need to recuse yourself from the Trump immunity case. Clearly, you are not unbiased. You are not impartial. You should not be deciding on if Trump should have immunity and making him some sort of king. And obviously, it would be presidents generally get some sort of crazy immunity, but it would directly impact the Trump case. And I am experiencing some tech problems as I'm trying to read it. Here we go. And so Justice Samuel Alito responded to the Democratic senators saying, you need to take yourself off of this Trump immunity case and recuse yourself, and said, now, as you might have been able to predict. And what was his excuse as to why this Stop the Steal MAGA crazy symbol being shown during the beginning of Biden's presidency after the election, after it had long been shown that Biden had legitimately won, that probably makes him not the best person to be ruling and not unbiased? He says, it's my wife's fault. As I said in reference, he wrote, to the other flag event, my wife is an independently minded private citizen. She makes her own decisions, and I honor her right to do so. Our vacation home was purchased with money she inherited from her parents and is titled in her name. It is a place away from Washington where she should be able to relax. A reasonable person who is not motivated by political or ideology. You were with her and she was spitting, apparently. Or at some point you were with her in one of these conversations. It's now your problem, sir. But by political or ideological considerations or a desire to affect the outcome of Supreme Court cases would conclude that this event does not meet the applicable standard for recusal. I am therefore duty-bound to reject your recusal request. So, as a reminder, you might be thinking, wife, Supreme Court Justice, why does that remind me of something? Well, it's because Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, another, what I think you could call a MAGA Supreme Court Justice, he is married to Ginny Thomas. And Ginny Thomas, going into Biden's inauguration day, was texting Mark Meadows, the chief of staff of the president of these United States of America at the time, saying that essentially you need to overturn the election, and that Democrats who had stolen the election were being held in barges off of Gitmo, and they were going to be tried in front of a military tribunal. Didn't happen, obviously, as you might know, but crazy conspiracy theories. And Clarence Thomas, beautifully so, has described Ginny Thomas as his best friend. If I held those sorts of views, my best friend, who was married to me, would probably at least not be completely opposed to them. So that was frightening too. Her trying to get the wife of a Supreme Court justice, trying to get the president to overturn an election and having these crazy conspiracy theories, that wasn't enough for Clarence Thomas to recuse himself from Trump-related, election-related cases. Here, same thing with Samuel Alito. It's my wife, and we would never talk about this. Whew. CNN reports Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito told lawmakers in a letter Wednesday that he will not recuse from cases involving the 2020 presidential election or the January 6, 2021 U.S. Capitol riot, despite concerns about two controversial flags that have flown on his properties. And the letter is a highly unusual response, underscoring how the revelations about the flags have dogged Alito for days. Dogged? I haven't heard that. You dog. Supreme Court justices rarely get into a back and forth with lawmakers, and many members of the court do not explain their reasons for recusing or not. So here's the deal. I respect the fact that liberals have an understanding of the importance of the legitimacy, of course, but also the perceived legitimacy of institutions. We have to believe in institutions in the democratic society for them to function. Okay, so that's why the election lies are so dangerous. That unfortunately puts us in a situation where we don't see this type of, to the same extent we just don't try to make the false equivalency. MAGA, if you try, there's nothing I can do, but I'm going to be mad, so don't. But liberals just don't allow themselves, we've seen it, Supreme Court justice, in the judiciary, to be as overtly ideological and thus political as we're seeing from some of these conservative judges and justices. And that frightens me. We're seeing right now Trump-appointed Judge Eileen Cannon overseeing Trump's case, and just the family member of a judge being involved in Democratic politics is enough to say that a whole case is rigged. But a Trump appointed judge overseeing a Trump case and doing a bunch of pro-Trump things in that process is not enough to say that she shouldn't be the one, or that there's some bias there that could mess with the legitimacy of the outcome. And that situation harms all of us. Now, I don't think people who are working on this mini decade endeavor of making the judiciary right wing, I don't think they care about what I'm going to say, but it makes all of our lives worse. And what I mean is, it slowly deteriorates, maybe not so slowly, the perceived legitimacy of, in this case, the Supreme Court. And the long-term damage of that, when people stop believing, just like with our elections, in the legitimacy of these institutions, you have the threat of a democratic crumble. And so that is what these individuals who are acting with their overturning of Roe v. Wade, with other super right-wing decisions we've seen that just don't make sense but seem super ideological, and with this type of behavior from Clarence Thomas, his wife, and Samuel Alito and his, it is harming the very institution that they wield power within. And the long-term repercussions of not having that dedication to the institution over just your ideology being the only goal is pretty devastating. And so they're doing a lot of harm to the very place that they get their power from. Please let me know. Do you think it's a good defense to say the reason the flag outside of my house was saying that the election was stolen is because of my dang wife?